You've probably felt it without being able to name it. It is 7:30 in the evening. The feeder is still swinging from the last visit. A goldfinch was on the coneflower 30 seconds ago. Then, almost as if someone pulled a switch, the yard empties. No motion, no sound. The exact spot where a finch was feeding is still. Most people call that the birds going to sleep. But that description is so incomplete. It is almost the opposite of true. What you just witnessed isn't rest. It is a coordinated behavioral transition. Scientists have spent decades trying to fully understand what happens. On the other side, in the hours between last light and first light, is some of the most sophisticated survival behavior. If you knew what was actually unfolding in your yard right now, you would not go to bed so easily. Welcome to Avian Intelligence. Hit subscribe before you keep reading. This channel is where we go past the surface of what birds do into the machinery underneath. What follows will change the way you interpret your backyard permanently. The quiet isn't empty. It is loaded. The silence that falls over your yard at dusk is not random. It is a finely tuned biological response to light. Birds track photoperiod, the ratio of light to dark, with a precision that makes our alarm clocks look crude. Deep within the avian brain, a cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus responds to minute changes in light intensity as photons hitting the retina drop below a specific threshold. A cascade of hormonal signals begins. Melatonin rises, corticosterone shifts, behavior changes. This is why your yard goes quiet at almost exactly the same time every evening. Regardless of cloud cover or temperature, the birds aren't reacting to darkness. They're reacting to a specific quantity of light. And they detected it 15 minutes before you. The first to go is usually the white-throated sparrow. Then, the finches. Chickadees linger a few minutes longer. The last bird you'll see is the American robin. They don't leave randomly. They leave in a sequence determined by each species' photosensitivity. It looks like chaos, but it is actually a schedule. Once the birds leave your feeder area, they split into two radically different survival strategies. The one a species uses tells you everything about its evolutionary history. Black-capped chickadees disappear into cavities, old woodpecker excavations, nest boxes, or gaps behind loose bark, and undergo one of the most remarkable physiological events in the animal kingdom. Warm-blooded animal world. They enter regulated hypothermia. Unlike the accidental hypothermia that kills mammals, this is a deliberate, controlled process. The chickadee's hypothalamus, essentially the bird's thermostat, allows core body temperature to fall. It falls by up to 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, below normal daytime levels. At the same time, metabolic rate drops by roughly 50%. Heart rate slows. Even the rate at which the bird's cells consume oxygen decreases. A 2001 study by Susan Budd Chaplin, published in The Condor, documented the reality. Black-capped chickadees in upstate New York, who could not access adequate nighttime cavities, faced higher mortality. Not because of freezing directly, but because without the energy savings of torpor, they burned through their fat reserves. They burned through everything before dawn. That is the knife's edge. These birds are walking every winter night. An 11-gram bird, barely heavier than a folded dollar bill, is doing metabolic math to survive. The nest box in your yard isn't decoration. On a January night at 10 degrees Fahrenheit, it is the margin between a chickadee that lives and one that doesn't. Strategy 2. The thermal cluster. On the other end of the spectrum, eastern bluebirds. During breeding season, A male bluebird will chase every other bluebird out of his radius. He isn't a cooperative animal. He is a 28-gram territorial machine. Come November, that same bird will cram himself into that same nest box, alongside 7-10, sometimes 14 other bluebirds, pressed flank to flank in a tight space. A study from Virginia Tech tracked nest box temperatures during these communal roost events. The interior temperature of an occupied box could be 25 degrees warmer than ambient air. In a bird that loses heat rapidly, that temperature differential is the difference between survival and death. The bluebirds aren't overcoming their territorial instincts. They're following a deeper logic of thermodynamics. When survival is the calculation, warmth wins, it always wins. One commenter on a birding forum watched as bluebirds filed into her nest box at dusk. Like a little apartment building everyone is rushing home to. She counted 11 go in. She never would have believed it if she hadn't seen it herself. That is the thing about what happens in your yard after dark. It sounds impossible until you witness it. The half-awake Sentinel Network. Here is where the biology gets genuinely strange for everyone involved. A roosting bird is not asleep in any way you would recognize. Many species of birds practice what neuroscientists call unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, a state in which one side of the brain stays awake while the other rests. Cerebral hemisphere enters deep sleep, while the other remains in a wakeful, alert condition. The eye connected to the sleeping hemisphere closes, and the other eye stays open, scanning, roughly every 10 to 30 minutes. The hemispheres switch. Both halves of the brain get rest. But the bird is never fully unconscious. Research at Indiana State University showed that the degree of unihemispheric sleep increases when predator pressure is high. Birds at the edge of roost groups kept one eye open significantly more often than birds in the center. Those in the center could afford to sleep more deeply because they were surrounded by other sentinels. Think about what that means for your yard. The chickadee in your oak tree right now is not fully asleep. It is processing auditory input, the snap of a twig, or the scrape of a raccoon climbing. It hears the particular wing beat frequency of a great horned owl moving through the yard. A study from the Max Planck Institute found that roosting birds showed neural responses to predator calls, even during the deepest phase of their nighttime rest cycle. The birds were asleep, but their brains were still listening. Your yard at midnight looks empty, but it is, in fact, saturated with distributed awareness. The birds aren't oblivious to the dark. They are embedded in it. The birds you think are asleep are actually singing. Here is something that reliably surprises people. The bird most associated with the dawn, the American robin, is frequently active in the middle of the night. Not occasionally, but regularly. Robins are exquisitely sensitive to light, as their retinas contain a higher density of photoreceptors than most songbirds. Their melatonin suppression response to artificial light is among the strongest documented in any urban bird species. In neighborhoods with significant streetlight exposure, robins will begin singing hours before civil dawn. Multiple people in cities like Chicago and London describe hearing robin song at 2 a.m. and assuming they were hearing things. They weren't, because that song is real and purposeful. From the bird's neurological perspective, it is completely appropriate. The robin's brain, reading the photons from a street lamp, has concluded that dawn is arriving. Its breeding system has activated, and it is singing to establish territory. This has measurable consequences. A study found that urban robins in areas with high artificial light showed earlier lay dates and elevated chronic stress. They suffer from accelerated reproductive aging compared to robins in darker environments. The light you leave on outside isn't neutral. It is actively altering their world, rewriting the robin's internal calendar and the mourning dove on your fence post, which looked completely inert all afternoon. It is capable of explosive nocturnal flight. The distinctive whistling sound its wings make when it flushes, caused by air passing through specialized, narrow outer, primary feathers, functions as an alarm signal to other doves in the area. Even in total darkness, a dove can detect a predator and produce a signal that alerts every other dove within earshot. No light required. The sky above your house right now. There is one more thing that happens on certain nights, and if you have never thought about it, the scale of it will genuinely arrest you. Right now, if you walked outside and looked straight up, you would see nothing, just a dark sky. Maybe some stars. But if you had access to a weather service Doppler radar, you would see something completely different. A mass return moving steadily northward. That looks on the display exactly like a region of heavy rain. Meteorologists spent decades puzzling over these ghost echoes before they understood what they were looking at. Birds, hundreds of millions of them during peak spring migration, mid-April through late May in North America. The volume of birds moving through the night sky above a single weather radar station in the eastern United States can exceed 500 million in a single night. Birdcast, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's real-time migration monitoring system, processes this radar data. On peak nights, the numbers are staggering enough that most people assume they're misreading the scale. The wood thrush that visited your yard last summer, the one with the spotted chest and the flute-like song, spent the winter somewhere in the forests of Belize or Honduras. Right now, it is flying north at night, at altitudes between 500 and 5,000 feet, navigating by the magnetic field of the Earth, and by star patterns it memorized as a juvenile. The ruby-throated hummingbird that will hover at your feeder in May completed a roughly 600-mile non-stop crossing of the Gulf of Mexico. Sometime in the last 2 weeks, a bird that weighs 3 grams, flying over open ocean in the dark for 18 to 22 consecutive hours, burning through fat reserves, accumulated over weeks of feeding in Mexico. These are not metaphors, these are documented, GPS tracked, radar confirmed realities. The sky above your house is a corridor. Every spring and fall, it fills with birds completing journeys. That, scaled to human terms, would represent flying from New York to Buenos Aires. Not once, but twice a year, every year of their lives. When your yard goes quiet at dusk, what you are witnessing is a system activating, not shutting down. The silence is the cover under which extraordinary things happen. A chickadee dropping its body temperature by 10 degrees to outlast the cold. Bluebirds overriding months of territorial programming to share warmth. A nervous system running continuous surveillance through the dark on half a brain's worth of power. And overhead, completely invisible to you, millions of birds crossing a continent on muscle and magnetism and ancient instinct. The first time I really understood this, not as a fact, but as a felt reality, was standing in a dark yard in November, knowing that a chickadee was somewhere in the oak 12 feet from me, metabolically banking itself against the cold, and that directly above me, unseen, hundreds of birds I would never identify were crossing the sky on their way somewhere south. That moment changed what I look at when I look at a backyard. You aren't watching birds. You are watching a survival system, so layered and precise that we are still, in 2025, working out the details. Go outside tonight. It is quieter than you think it is, and far more alive. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been genuinely startled by something in your yard after dark? A sound? A shape? A bird? You couldn't explain. We read every single one.